On April 14th, 2005, I was a primary care physician walking through a hospital hall like I had done many times before. But this day was different because I was about to be the patient. I was about to give my left kidney to Robert Phillips, a man who had been on dialysis for several years and who I had started dating less than a year prior. Now, how I got to this point, I think, can best be summed up by part of a quote from Maya Angelou. When you know better, do better. And I say this because when I was a resident physician in training, I took care of lots of patients in the hospital who were on dialysis. But then I was usually sleep deprived and always eager to get on to the next patient. I paid careful attention to the dialysis orders and the blood test results, but sadly, not so much to the person living with a serious illness. All that changed when I became Robert's girlfriend. As Robert's girlfriend, I wasn't in a rush anymore. I wanted to be with him at dialysis as often as possible to help him pass the time, 4 hours, 3 times a week, trying hard not to move his left arm too much and dislodge the needles that were connecting him to the dialysis machine. As girlfriend, I watched him struggle to not drink too much liquid in between dialysis treatments, even though he was thirsty all the time. Because if he did, because his kidneys couldn't pee it out, he would pay for it with swelling and cramping and feeling short of breath. I went with him to his transplant evaluation appointment. And there I saw a side of medicine that I couldn't see as a primary care doctor. It was a side that felt like it was stacked against him because it was part of a system in which blacks waited nearly 2 years longer to get a kidney transplant than whites. So it was that day that I decided I was going to give him one of my kidneys. Because I knew what he was going through. Because I knew better. And because I knew better, I also went on to become a nephrologist, a kidney doctor. So my goal today is to tell you about 3 patients that I've encountered since becoming a nephrologist that I think demonstrate how we can all do better. The first is Chris. When I met Chris, he was this 25-year-old, fresh-faced, strawberry blonde-headed young man who should have been able to just focus on his future. But instead, he was facing kidney failure. His kidneys were failing because of an autoimmune disease called IgA nephropathy, and he needed to start dialysis less than a year later. Now, I don't know how many of you noticed this little guy at the bottom of the picture having tea with Chris, but this is his dialysis catheter, surgically implanted into his belly. And this is the way Chris coped with his illness. Taped a little face on it, named it, called it his closest, newest friend. Chris also had 2 older brothers, both healthy, but both said no to giving baby brother a kidney. They figured he's on the waiting list to get a kidney from somebody who's passed away, and he can just do dialysis until then. Now, the problem with that logic is that it can take up to 9 years to get a deceased donor kidney transplant, depending on your blood type and where you live. And every year, there are another 100,000 people on that same list. But we only do about 12,000 deceased donor kidney transplants each year, and another 5,000, roughly, living donor transplants. So that's how we end up with 13 people dying every day, waiting for a kidney transplant. One of the brothers came to visit Chris for the first time since he started dialysis. And he saw how Chris had to connect himself every night to a dialysis machine that pushed and pulled fluid in and out of the space between his skin and his abdominal organs all night long. And Chris just hoped that he could get through the night before the alarm would be beeping. are accidentally tugging on his catheter. And that's all it took to make the brother change his mind. And he decided to give Chris one of his kidneys. Now, his donation gave Chris the best chance for a longer and better quality of life. Better than a deceased donor kidney could, way better than dialysis could. After 5 years, 2/3 of all kidney transplants are going strong at 5 years, but only about 1/3 of dialysis patients are even alive. Now, 4 months after surgery, Robert became my husband. I know he kind of had to marry me after that, right? Yeah. But he has had my kidney for 12 years and counting, and the longest living kidney lasted for 54 years in a man who died when he was 88 years old. Now, this man happened to be named Robert Phillips, too. You know, at my core, I am a superstitious country girl, so I take that as a very good sign. So, now that you know what people with kidney failure are facing, if there's somebody in your life who is in need of a kidney transplant and you're healthy enough to give one, I hope you'll consider it. I get that it's a bit daunting. I had all kinds of butterflies in my stomach the morning of surgery. But when I woke up and I saw this bag at the foot of Robert's bed in recovery, just filling up with lots of pale yellow urine, I was like, that's my kidney doing that. And I was just so happy because I knew that soon he would be able to drink as much ice-cold beverage as his thirst desired. And if I could go back in time, I would do it again. And to be a donor, you don't need to be related. And the only race that matters is the human race. You don't even have to be a perfect match. In fact, Robert and I only had 1 out of 6 genetic markers felt important at the time in common. At the very least, I hope you will consider registering as an organ donor with the DMV and let your family know that you did, so that after you're gone, they will uphold your wishes and all your healthy parts will go to make the lives of others longer and better. Now, if you're one of the 26 million adults in this country with chronic kidney disease, the story of my next patient, who I'll call Ms. Afuta, is for you. Ms. Afuta was almost 50 years old when I met her. She had this smooth brown Samoan skin, but her kidneys were shrunken and shriveled, hardly functioning because of years and years of uncontrolled diabetes and high blood pressure, which caused 2/3 of chronic kidney disease in this country. But even though she had such advanced disease, she tried to run away from it. She wouldn't believe me when I told her that her kidneys would soon fail and that she needed to prepare for dialysis. She said things like, you know, this swelling in my legs, that's because I've been on my feet all day. And this metallic taste, that's because of the pills that you tell me to take, not because of kidney failure. Truth is, there is no outrunning kidney failure. Unless something else gets you first, like you get hit by a bus or your heart stops beating, kidney failure will catch you. And I know she was hoping for a miracle, but in truth, the only miracle that was really in her near future was dialysis. Because 60 years ago, dialysis didn't exist, and everybody with kidney failure just passed away. So because Ms. Afuta could not face the reality, she ended up with a lot of avoidable things, like the trauma of feeling like you're about to die and having to call 911, 13 hours in the emergency room, a plastic dialysis catheter in her chest, a hospital admission. She was looking at dialysis as if it would be the end of her life, when in truth it would just make her life different. No, it wouldn't be perfect or take away all the issues that come with a vital organ dying. Yes, it would have its frustrations and take time. But the time in between could be filled with life and all the things that she wanted to keep doing. With dialysis, she could expect to live for many years. Without it, once her kidneys failed completely, she'd get a week, maybe 2. Now, roughly 80% of adults in this country have significant chronic kidney disease and don't even know it. So if you might be a patient, for example, you have diabetes or high blood pressure, or even if it just runs in your family, get tested. A simple blood and urine test can detect kidney disease long before you'll ever feel anything. And knowing is doing better for yourself and your family. If you already know you're a patient, then don't let fear get in the way of you accepting reality so that you can do better. How many of you saw this movie, The Book of Eli, starring Denzel Washington? Yeah, not many. So the next patient that I'll tell you about looks exactly like Denzel in this movie. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking, but I have never been among the multitudes of women who would just wriggle out of her panties and throw them on any stage that Denzel stands on. I just saw my patient, who I will call Book of Eli, as a good-looking brother who had a chronic kidney problem. Now, when I met Book of Eli, he was very muscular. I needed a large, extra-long blood pressure cuff to take his blood pressure. But 5 years later, as his kidney disease declined from a disease called membranous nephropathy, his muscles had wasted away too. And so a regular blood pressure cuff would do. At every visit, I would tell him about all of his test results, including creatinine, the blood test that we used to find out about kidney function. In 1999, a group of researchers published a study of 1,600 adults who they examined to find out equations that we could use to estimate kidney function using creatinine. Now, because creatinine is a breakdown product of our muscles released at a fairly constant rate all day, the equations that they came up with also include age and gender. Because as we get older, we tend to lose muscle mass, and men tend to have higher muscle mass than women. But if the patient is Black, they suggested that we also need to multiply by 1.2. Because what they found is that Blacks in their study generally had a higher muscle mass than the white folks did. So these equations got applied to the entire population, everybody, even though that original study only included about 200 Black people. And no American Samoans, no Native Americans, no Asians, no Latinos. And these groups have very different body frames, but in our equations, they're just not Black. So the implication then, only Black people are different. And the problem with generalizations, or at least one of them, is that sometimes they're not true. But in medicine, we tend to not challenge these things, particularly when they are in line with our underlying assumptions and beliefs. Like the belief that our social construct of race is the same as real biological science. Even though the Human Genome Project completed sequencing the entire human DNA in 2003 and found that we humans are 99.9% identical. And that 0.1% difference does not fit into our made-up race categories. Now, I wonder how many healthcare providers, when they're sitting in front of their patients, interpreting lab results and deciding what they will do or not about them, how many remember or even know that this race adjustment is really supposed to be about muscle mass, a proxy for muscle mass? Or are they just focusing on the race of the person in front of them? And which one of these people they would quote the race-adjusted kidney function estimate to? The skinny black woman or the white male bodybuilder? These shortcuts can have significant negative consequences for Black people who need a kidney transplant and happen to have lower muscle mass, like my patient Book of Eli. So I explained all of this to him, and I asked him to collect his urine for a full 24 hours and get a blood test so that we could get a more accurate measure of how well his kidneys were filtering blood, what we call a glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. Now, this more accurate estimate showed that his GFR was 20. And that was the same as the shortcut equation, GFR, the not race-adjusted one. At 20, at a GFR of 20, people can be placed on the wait list for kidney transplant. Book of Eli would have had to wait an additional year had I waited for his race-adjusted estimate, which was 24 at the time, to fall to 20. And this matters because time on the wait list is one of the most important determinants of when a person gets a kidney transplant. So by using a more accurate estimate, Book of Eli got more time on the list. And for patients dealing with kidney failure, time is life. So today I've told you about Robert and Chris so that you would know at least some of what people with kidney failure are going through. I told you about Ms. Afuta so you would know what happens when we let fear paralyze us. And I told you about Book of Eli so you would know how when we make assumptions about race, it can blur the lines of real science. So now that you know better, what will you do? Thank you.